Linux Mint 22.1 was released today, and it is a bigger release than I expected. But what's most interesting in here is that Mint is really trying to revive and to rework and rebuild a working, stable, redesigned ecosystem around Debian packages, where every other distro is either trying to go immutable, working on snaps, or on flatpaks. So we're gonna take a look at everything new inside of Mint, and it's a good version, and we're also gonna take a look at our sponsor. This video is sponsored by Proton VPN. You probably already know about Proton Mail, one of the most secure and private email services out there, but they also have their VPN service, which is equally as secure and private. It's also based in Switzerland, and it doesn't log any activity, and it doesn't share any data with third parties. Of course, it is fully encrypted, so you can use it from any public Wi-Fi or at home to either change your location or just stay anonymous online. On top of that, Proton VPN uses a 10 gigs per second network plus a suite of VPN accelerators, so even when you're using it, your browsing stays really fast. Proton VPN supports all your devices, PC or mobile, and they can even run on routers. And they've just completely rebuilt their Linux desktop client for it as well, complete with advanced features like a DNS filter to block ads and trackers, a kill switch to stop your internet connection if the VPN connection drops, so your IP is never exposed, plus Secure Core, which provides a double VPN to provide a server located in a country where strong privacy laws apply. I don't usually recommend VPN services, but Proton VPN is my pick of choice. And you can use it for free by clicking the link in the description below, or they also have paid plans for more features and even more security. So yeah, click the link in the description to get started with Proton VPN. So first, let's go over all the visual, graphical changes to the desktop and to the baked-in apps. So Mint 22.1 comes with Cinnamon 6.4. It's not an enormous update, but it does come with a few things. First, there's a new default Cinnamon theme. It's not the Mint Y theme that's been updated, it's the default Cinnamon one. And this is what other distributions that are not Mint tend to ship by default. So Ubuntu Cinnamon, Fedora Cinnamon, Arch, and others get a new default theme for Cinnamon, which is definitely a lot better. You've got better rounded corners, you've got a nicer looking black or at least dark background, you've got a bit more padding. It just looks a little bit nicer all around. Now, speaking of themes, the Mint Y theme also received a few changes here and there with a few more rounded corners, but honestly, you'll be hard-pressed to notice the difference. It still looks exactly like you're used to, honestly, in day-to-day use. Now, you also have the usual new entries in the wallpapers, but like, okay, maybe someone cares about this, but it's not like it's a major change. Now, visually, you'll also notice that the authentication dialogues and a bunch of others have received changes all across the desktop. So you now have the same similar GNOME style of things with split buttons. They are no longer stuck at the bottom. They probably just rebased this out of what GNOME did in Mutter and in the GNOME shell, since Cinnamon still uses some code from the GNOME shell. You'll see these dialogues pop up when you try and change the resolution of your desktop, for example. You'll see those when you're trying to authenticate and other things like that. This is a change that comes to Cinnamon and also to Linux Mint. It goes to everyone using Cinnamon, and I think it's good. Like, it looks a bit nicer than the previous version. Now, the on-screen display elements, like the Sound OSD, have been redesigned as well to be a bit less invasive on your screen. They all look a bit nicer. Now, Cinnamon also gained a new feature called Nightlight. You used to be able to do this in Linux Mint with Redshift, which was a third-party utility, but it didn't really work anymore because it was based on an unmaintained library, and it also did not support Wayland. So now, straight from Cinnamon settings, you've got Nightlight. You can select the color temperature, you can preview what it does, and you can specify start and end times, or have an automatic schedule based on your time zone and the time and date, so it automatically starts when the sun starts to set, and it automatically lifts when the sun. Linux Mint also now has power modes called Power Saver, Balanced, or Performance if you have a dedicated GPU. This did not exist previously in Mint. It's kind of surprising. I was sure they had that before, but apparently they didn't, and so now you're gonna be able to change those power modes. Now do note that this change only comes to Cinnamon. Graphically, you can use these power modes on the XFC or the Mate variant of Linux Mint, but you will need to use the command line to trigger them because, well, these systems just don't apparently have the graphical option to switch power modes, or they don't have the applets necessary. In Mint, you can change these settings from the main system settings or from the power applet that shows your battery if you're on a laptop, for example. You also have a few other changes. For example, you can now decide to display notifications over full screen windows when previously these would be hidden behind those windows. You can set that or not if you prefer. Nemo will now let you automatically expand rows when you're trying to drag and drop to the tree view, or you can disable that if you really do not want to expand your tree view every time you try to drag something inside of another folder. So you now have one more option to control that. Now in the global window list, which is basically just the task manager that is slotted inside of the main panel of Cinnamon and Linux Mint, you can now choose if you want to display the windows from all monitors or only from the monitors that do not have a window list. Now, if you want sound to go higher than 100%, you now can in a more easy fashion. You can just click the overamplification button and now you have access to more than 100%. And if you disable that, you keep obviously the volume level that you had set previously. This is a bit nicer than what used to exist in Cinnamon. Now the Alt tab settings also were changed a little bit. They look a bit simpler, and also the minimized windows are now placed at the end of the task list. So if I minimize here the file manager, it will be placed automatically at the end, even though it wasn't previously. That's about it for those changes. On the lock screen, you can now display the password that you're trying to type. This apparently wasn't a thing before. I think it's always nice to have that option just to check that you haven't mistyped something. If you have very complex password with very weird symbols, then obviously being able to check if that works or not is interesting. Finally, the bulk renaming tool now lets you remove accents from the file name. So if you're not a French person like me and you don't have accents in all the words that you're trying to type, then you can just make sure that all of these go away and you don't have any encoding problems anywhere. That's just a little quality of life improvement here. So as you've seen, obviously these changes to the Cinnamon desktop and to the Linux Mint experience will really not change anything on how you actually use your desktop. Bit of quality of life improvements. Mostly it's for other distros that ship Cinnamon, so it looks a little bit better for them. That's probably something that was requested a lot, but generally you did not have a lot to add to the Mint experience. It's already pretty feature complete, and if you add a lot more stuff, then you basically make a GTK-based KDE, which would not really be that interesting. The second big thing I want to talk about, which is also the title of the video basically, is Mint's focus on DEB packages. You probably know that Mint focuses a lot on Debian packages. They're probably the last distro that really does that apart from Debian. They do support FlatHub and Flatpaks out of the box, but generally what they try to encourage is using Debian packages. They actually repackage a lot of software as Debs, even though they use Ubuntu as a base, and Ubuntu replaces a lot of stuff with snaps. Now the issue with relying on Debian packages is that the entire software infrastructure around apt itself is pretty old and pretty crummy. It tends to not really be maintained. The apt package manager is obviously well maintained, but the libraries around it that let you interact with the package cache, that let you install files when you're not root, stuff like that, it's not that well maintained. And the graphical tools around that, like the Synaptic package manager, for example, or the gdeb-i package installer, are also pretty much abandoned upstream. They receive patches from Ubuntu, from Debian, from Mint, but basically the architecture itself is set in stone and no one will ever work on them fully ever again. And that's why Mint decided to work on their own apt-based tools to make sure that installing Debian packages, performing in-place upgrades and things like that would still work properly and would be a bit easier to handle on their own. So Mint built AppKit, which is a library that lets a non-root user refresh the package cache, install packages, remove packages, perform updates, basically all the basic tasks that you would expect and that graphical programs can call to. And they also built Captain, which is a brand new graphical package installer for Linux Mint, which lets you do what GDEBI does. Basically, it's the exact same thing, but it lets you install this with a modern application that's been redesigned from the ground up. It's very simple. It just handles downloaded deb packages or links that start with apt:// which are basically the apt URL links that Ubuntu created and introduced. It just does that, so it's not adding any extra features, but it does let you do that in a modern fashion without relying on old tools like GDEBI, which are no longer really maintained. So what are the benefits? Well, currently there are none that you can really see, but in the future it will mean you have a much nicer time when trying to install packages that might require certain weird dependencies, when you're trying to update your system or upgrade it in place, when you're trying to update or download extra packages that you installed manually. You will get better translations, you'll get faster speeds across the entire app ecosystem around installing and updating your system, and in terms of dev work, it also means that Mint will have a much better time trying to implement improvements and fixes around apt-based tools and Debian packages. So it's a lot of background work which you will probably never see apart from the software manager, which is actually really faster and nicely multi-threaded and works properly when installing multiple things. It's a good piece of software now. But generally what it means is that Mint is trying to keep the deb package system alive. And that's really cool because every other distro is trying to basically move away from debs for everything apart from their distro base or from RPMs because they're trying to introduce immutable distros, snaps, or work on flatpaks. Having that third way still available and relying on modern tools is cool. I do hope that Debian also takes a look at these tools and maybe starts using them and contributing to them instead of relying on the older ones, but we'll see how it goes. Now let's move on to the Wayland Session. It is still completely experimental on Mint 22.1. They haven't changed anything around this, but they did improve things a lot. Namely, you can now do everything that requires admin permissions. If you tried the Wayland Session before, chances are you noticed that it wasn't really usable because when you tried installing something, updating something, or removing something, you never saw any authentication pop-ups, meaning you could just not do it. Now this is solved in this version of Mint, which is nice because it means the Wayland Session is actually usable now. It works for installing packages, removing packages, or performing updates, but it also works with changing certain settings that are admin locked, like for example the firewall or things like that. It also works with every app that requires admin preferences. So if we look at Timeshift, this also requires you to type an admin password, and it works under Wayland now, which is really nice. And you also obviously now have the nightlight feature, which did not exist or work properly on Wayland before, and now obviously it does. Obviously, it is still an experimental Wayland Session, meaning you will find bugs here and there are probably some missing parts, and things will not work properly all the time. They don't plan on making this the default session or the main focus before Ubuntu 26.04 releases, the next LTS, so in more than a year, so they still have a lot of time to finalize how their Wayland Session works, but right now at least it should be very usable with every standard basic feature you'd expect working, but I would expect things based on X Wayland and maybe handling of dedicated GPUs and multi-monitor being a bit more broken than on other desktops that really have been working on Wayland for much longer. So in the end, Mint 22.1 is a bigger release than I expected, and it is very cool to see the Debian-based, package-based ecosystem improve still. I personally prefer Flatpaks for graphical applications. This is now my main installation method of choice on any distro that I use because I find that generally these applications work better than any packaged ones. They're more up to date, it's easier to install extensions or plugins if you need that. I like them. But the base of a system is still mostly packaged based. A lot of distributions are trying to replace that, but even if you build an image-based system, you're still building your image out of packages. And so all the tools around those packages should be improved and should be worked on. Even if it's just external graphical tools, those things still need to exist. And Mint doing that work makes total sense. They're one of the last bastions of Debian packages. They're the ones doing the repackaging of every app that Ubuntu is trying to ditch into snaps. It makes sense, and it's nice to have some newer graphical tools and some newer underlying libraries to work with all of this. Now, in terms of the Cinnamon desktop, there's not a lot new here. If you're not using Linux Mint and you're a Cinnamon-based distro, then chances are you'll be happy to have a new solid theme, even though it probably was relatively easy to install the Minty or Mint Y theme that Mint ships instead of the default one. But also you get a bunch more options. It's not like you're gonna be able to add a lot more without turning Cinnamon into KDE, and with that you're gonna get a lot of problems because the more options you have, the more configurations you have, the more problems you tend to have as well. In general, it's a solid upgrade. Just like every Mint upgrade, it's not going to change how you use your desktop, but it's also probably not what Mint users really expect or want out of Linux Mint. It's improvements all around, and Mint isn't the fastest distro, it's not the best looking distro, it's not the lightest distro, but it's the most competent on all areas. It provides all the options that most people need, it provides all the graphical tools that most users need, it provides a very simple, stable experience, even though it can be very up to date now with the default kernels being updated way more often, and with Flatpaks and FlatHub. It's just probably the best distro all across all the different points that are important for a desktop operating system. So it's still the one I recommend to every newcomer and everyone who just wants a no headache, no problems experience. You just download it, you install it, it runs. It won't blow your mind or anything, but it just works and is still, in my opinion, the best recommendation you could give to anyone who wants to dive into Linux. And if you want to dive into Linux with a new computer, check out our sponsor, Tuxedo Computers. They make laptops and desktops that ship with Linux out of the box. It's actually pre-installed, and they do a lot of work as open source for handling all the drivers and all the weird moving parts that these computers can have. You can have access to all of these drivers in various repos that they host, and obviously everyone can recompile those, and they actually do for distros like Fedora or Arch, for example. They have a big range of computers that fits every need and every price point, whether you're looking for a laptop, a desktop, something for office work or for gaming or for video production, and I do everything these days on their computers. All my channel is run on one of their laptops, all the podcast, the video, the editing, the recording, it's done on one of their computers. And all my gaming needs are served by one of their desktops, the Tuxedo Cube. If you're looking for a new computer, you want to run Linux on it without headaches, and you want to support a company that contributes to Linux, click the link in the description and get yourself a Tuxedo computer. They're really, really good. Now, thanks everyone for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, you know what to do. Plenty of cool YouTube buttons that you can click to make the video grow a little bit and the channel go better than last year. And if you really like the channel, there are plenty of links to support it in the description with some really cool perks that are pretty inexpensive, if I'm honest. So check that out. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I guess you'll hear me in the next one. Bye!